So he's gotten to a point where I think right now, finance-wise, we were pushed off into this year we're in now. I'm going to say this coming year, but we're actually in 2021. So he's looking forward once he gets his tax returns in. Supposedly that's going to boost him. He can go ahead and buy this property, much against my advice and better judgment. But one of the first things he's going to have to deal with is, what do I do with this family with a child under the age of 6? You're now going to be responsible for this family that's living there. And that could very well mean, and probably will very well mean, having to de-lead, but at the very least to give notice. So there are those who own property out there who would like to say, well, I don't know, I have no knowledge of. You almost have a duty to find out. I'd rather know and deal with it ahead of time than to just ignore it and have it be a non-issue. So there are some materials, probably like 1,000 pages, that Sarah is going to send out to everybody later on. What I'm going to go by primarily, not that you can see it from here, but you can actually go to the state's website and pull this class off. It's RE20R13, which means it was created in 2013. So it's the newest one that the state has out there, but it's still, in my opinion, for the most part, it's relatively still current. Massachusetts was the first state in the country to actually take lead paint seriously. And we were the first ones to enact any type of legislation. And later on in 1978, across the country, it became a federal issue as well. It's something that no one wants to, we don't want to know, we don't want any of our family members, we don't want anyone that we know, but we don't want any of our tenants or prospective buyers or anyone to be affected by lead paint. But lead paint is something that does affect many, many people. Or lead, I should say lead poisoning affects many people. I was watching something the other night on water. And of course they brought up, and I'm not that I'm going to belabor the point, but they brought up Flint, Michigan. And the water in Flint is most people I think know, it's not old news, is undrinkable. Why? Because there's lead in the pipes that it had leached out. Their system is so old that there are children and adults, everyone in Flint, Michigan, who cannot drink the water. And those that may have in the past may very well have lead poisoning, not from paint, but from the lead in the pipes. So at the end of the day, lead is something that's catastrophic to many people. And if you're under the age of 6, it can cause damage, not just to your organs, but to your brain, to all parts of your body. But obviously, if you're developing, and that's hence why the statute talks about people under the age of 6 and doing certain things as the owner of property, you're otherwise responsible. So I've had closings where somebody tries to make a joke about it. I would highly recommend, as funny as it might seem when you're saying it, and the joke would be, just don't chew on the windowsills. Well, it sounds humorous when you're saying it out loud, until someone turns around and says, the would-be buyer, one of the buyers raises a hand and said, I had lead paint poisoning as a kid. And then the room falls flat. And that actually happened at a closing probably about a dozen years ago. It sounds funny, haha, but it's not really funny. And the reality is the statute's all about keeping lead paint, if you will, encapsulated or removed up to 5 feet. Any area that's, as the statute says, that where that a child could mouth the area, right? That some, if you will, chew on a windowsill, or, not to be gross, lick paint or what have you, up to, you're thinking, I'm thinking a 6-year-old is not necessarily 5 feet tall. So 5 feet or less, it would either have to be removed or encapsulated to protect those children in theory. But there's a totally different area where lead paint can get in someone's system if there's lead paint in the house. And many people don't think about it. But if you have an older home, and we were just discussing a few minutes ago, an older home from 1920, that has old windows, so something that's not been renovated, but has all the character that a 1920s home might have, and has old windows that may not, I'm presuming they've been painted in the last 100 years, but presume that or not, if you paint it over, think of an old window going up and down and causing friction, and there's lead paint maybe a layer or two behind underneath something that was painted over. it's now causing theoretically lead paint particles to go into the air, right, to become an aerosol. It gets better. And now that those lead paint particles have fallen, if you will, on the furniture in the house. And now you sit down on the couch or the chair or what have you, and poof, it goes back up in the air, and it's a constant aerosol that people are inhaling over and over again. So we'd like to think that it's just somebody, again, chewing on a windowsill or licking the walls or whatever. Why would a child ever do that? Supposedly lead is sweet. And going back, let's say 2,000 years ago, the Romans would sweeten things using lead, which is probably in part, not completely, but one of the many reasons why the Roman Empire eventually fell, because of not lead paint poisoning, but lead poisoning. But they used lead to sweeten drinks. A lot of the vessels that they drank things out of, wine and what have you, the beverages may have been acidic, but they were leaching out lead into that. Again, very similar to Flint, Michigan. But going back to lead paint itself, it wasn't until 1971 when Massachusetts recognized it. This is something we have to deal with. And then the entire country in 1978 really putting into place legislation that would protect all of us. Now, to protect yourselves and myself, when we're dealing with this, we have lovely forms that we're filling out. So one of the many things that Sarah will send later on today is a form you've seen many, many times that I'm always sitting there at a closing, especially an FHA closing, and I look at the Don form, and I hate to fill these things out, but every single lender is going to send me the same form, the same disclosure form that all of you have had signed at closing prior to, and I know you can't see it from where you are, but the one that has the property transfer notification certification, and I know none of you can read that from where you are, but you've seen this form with all the little check boxes that has to be initialed here and there. And pardon my language, I'm like a dumbass at a closing looking at it. And the first thing I do is I turn to the realtors and I say, hey guys, and everyone will say, oh yeah, we signed one of those, we'll have it. And I'll cheat because the bank wants to use their version, and I'll cheat and I'll just use their system or their form already and just regurgitate what's already in the form that's been signed. Hopefully nowadays, many of our closings are virtual, or I should say they're by FedEx. I have one tomorrow. I'm probably going to drop off docs to the other attorneys. I have seller. I'm going to drop off seller's attorney's docs either tonight or first thing tomorrow morning, local attorney. And that's how most of us are dealing with things. I had one that closed yesterday. I was seller's attorney. I FedEx everything down to Waltham, even though the property is up here. So many of our closings are not in person. So I don't have that luxury to say to my realtors, hey, can I please see your lead paint form so I can cheat off of it? And of course, the bank wants their own version of it. So these, for the most part, we were just discussing before the class started, for the most part, it's all cover yourself. It's CYA. You fill out these lovely forms so that your butt's covered, your seller's butt's covered. The buyer should know, the buyer should be aware, but often a seller has absolutely no knowledge of whether or not there's lead paint. And quite frankly, even if they had knowledge that there's lead paint, they don't want to say. So off the record, totally off the record, though a whole bunch of people listening right now, my wife and I bought our house from family, 15 years ago, longer than that now. And one of the first things we did, my wife is tearing off layers of wallpaper and got down to a layer of paint. The paint is a very deep, deep red. If you go to Home Depot, you can buy a lead paint test kit. And our children were still relatively small at the time. And one of the first things I wanted to know, but I didn't want to know, was whether or not there was lead paint. If you ever buy one of those kits, do you know what color the swab turns after you swipe it across the paint? Anybody? Pink. Guess what's going to happen every single time you swipe red paint? It's going to be pink. The next words out of my mouth were, let's cover this up as soon as we can. And like it never happened. So I really don't know whether or not it's lead paint. I can legitimately say that, at least in my mind, I can rationalize that. But there are those that know. If you have a home that was built prior to 1978, odds are pretty good there's lead paint in that property, even if it's been de-leaded. So even if it's been de-leaded, I can almost guarantee you there's lead paint somewhere. The cheapest way to take care of it is to encapsulate it. But what often happens is somebody will actually go in there and de-lead it. If I have a client who's buying a multiple family property, one of the many things we want to see are the de-lead certificates. I want to make sure that those are handed over. They're of no value after the person sells the property, so they should be handed over. It's one of those things you're better to know the good, the bad, and the ugly than to not know. So obviously we know lead paint. I want to say we know. Would we all agree that lead paint or lead in general is not a good thing to have in our system? I know for those of you who've been driving a motor vehicle for any length of time, you may or may not recall, some of you might be too young, but there was a point at which that the only gasoline that we could purchase was leaded gasoline. And we go around, leaded or unleaded, you pull up at a pump, back when there was a thing called full service, and many of you probably don't even know what full service actually means. But full service, and they check your oil and everything else, and you'd say leaded or unleaded. Again, it's not just the paint. We knew that lead in general was not a good thing for any human beings to be ingesting, breathing in any form at all. And it causes, lead paint poisoning is a serious disease. It causes all kinds of neurological system, all kinds of issues. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an MD. I'm not going to pretend to be. But I don't want to know of anyone close to me, or anyone at all for that matter. I don't want anyone to be harmed by lead paint. Not just because I don't want somebody getting sued, which can happen anyway, because we live in America and people like to sue other people, and there are lawyers, not yours truly, because I don't do personal injury law, but that's where it would fall under. It would be under a possible tort issue that would come up. So lead paint can be ingested as either paint chips or dust or particles. You're just breathing it in. As I mentioned, the windows going up and the windowsills going up and down, it's creating friction, lead paint particles in the air. I was talking to someone earlier today, and I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but there are many, through urban renewal back in the 60s and more the 70s and even 80s, they would tear down a whole bunch of 2 and 3 family homes. And I'm thinking of next door, the city of Lawrence, whole neighborhoods would be torn down right by the so-called new library in Lawrence. There was a whole neighborhood that was torn down. And I would almost guarantee you every single one of those properties had lead paint within them. The lead paint companies at some point, maybe not from that neighborhood, but in general, lead paint companies that produce lead paint have been sued by attorneys or by families through attorneys for the lead paint particles that were in the soil long after the real estate was gone. So the homes, well, the real estate's there, but the homes, the buildings, the structures were long gone. But because theoretically there was lead paint, and all of you in this room were lead paint manufacturers, you all get sued because there was lead paint in the soil. Whether or not they were all successful or not, because someone was, little Johnny's playing in the dirt, if you will, outside in the neighborhood. The mere fact that there used to be a home there that had lead paint was enough to have a cause of action against the lead paint company. So it's something that with more and more new homes being built, we don't think about it that much, but it's still it's still obviously a major issue that we're dealing with. So Massachusetts, first in the nation in 1971, created legislation regarding lead paint, and the laws were amended, and then other states created them starting in 1978. It was added, lead was added supposedly to help dry faster, improve its durability and resist moisture. It was added to gasoline, probably because it stopped the knocking and pinging, so-called. If you ever bought a car back in the old days, that would be one of the many selling factors, which I don't hear anyone talking about today. Most of the lead paint statutes across the country were modeled after Massachusetts, for what it's worth. Lead paint regulations across Massachusetts, one of the many attachments that Sarah will send out later is the CMR that governs lead paint. It's a gazillion pages long. I said before the class started, it puts me to sleep, never mind what it might do for everyone else. So if you have trouble sleeping this evening or this weekend, feel free to read through it. Ultimately, the whole idea is to protect all of us, but especially children under 6 and under, from being susceptible or being poisoned by lead paint. Um, for the most part, it's covering all multiple surfaces. So think of any place in your home and just look up 5 feet from the floor up. If there's lead paint in that house, it would either have to be removed or encapsulated. And what that means is not you or I, because I'm certainly not a lead paint, I'm not a lead paint removal specialist licensed. There's special licenses. And for those of you who've taken classes with my friend Andy Consoli, and I know he does his class 1,000 times better than I can hope to. So he will tell you there are people that are licensed to remove lead paint. I know some in years past, some people who would buy multiple family properties and go get their lead paint cert, the lead paint license, so they can go around and remove their own lead paint. I would highly recommend hiring somebody to do it anyway, but you don't have a choice. A landlord or an owner of property, unless he or she is lead paint removal licensed, they can't touch it. They can't do anything with it. They can't remove it. They can't do anything with it whatsoever. It has to be a licensed professional to protect everyone. So once you've had it done, then obviously the get out of jail free card, so to speak, of the lead paint certificate saying it's been de-leaded, and those are worth their weight in gold once you have them. So I mentioned it, on the walls, on the door frames, on the windowsills, anywhere a child might be able to reach. I personally have no knowledge of anyone. I grew up in a 3-family. For all I know, there was lead paint in that house. My parents bought it in 1965. I can't imagine that there wouldn't be lead paint in the property. There probably was. To my knowledge, none of us are affected. If we are, I just don't remember. All joking aside, it's not really a joke. It's not really funny. So it's actually illegal, and not to beat a dead horse. It's illegal for any of us who are not licensed to remove lead paint or encapsulate it to touch it. Once a lead paint inspector has come in and verified there's lead paint, they'll issue a letter of compliance, essentially saying that the property has been de-leaded or encapsulated, presuming they've done that. And that would protect the owner of the property from any potential liability. Now, keep in mind, everything wears out. So it's something that if you own, and I've had clients almost a year ago who, as partners, bought two different multiple family properties, both of whom the previous owner owned since Jesus was a baby, and odds are pretty good that they didn't go out and, there were no lead paint certificates, which now the onus is on my clients if they own this, if they're going to rent to anyone. And when I say anyone, I mean anyone, not just people with families with children under the age of 6, but anyone at all, to have them de-leaded at some point. If for no other reason, I have peace of mind. I have an empty unit. I want to rent it out. And John and Mary Smith come in, and they're a newly married couple, have no idea if they're ever going to have children or not. I could also have the same couple. They're in their 70s and they're moving in. Who's to say they don't have a grandchild that comes in and moves in with them? I can't stop that from happening. I can't discriminate against those people in any which way, shape, or form, or as an owner of the property, or I'm going to be sued till the cows come home. But I'm also opening myself up that somebody could get very, very sick. So going back to my client who's buying down in, I think it's Fall River, and really wants this property. I know right now there's a family with a child under the age of 6 living there. And that child, what I didn't add before, that child actually has lead paint poisoning already. Another reason why I don't want my client to buy this property. Allegedly, the lead paint poisoning came from a previous home that the child lived in. How do I prove that? How does anyone prove that, right? That's a field day for a potential attorney down in for that family to sue. And here's the best part: the parents or the guardians of that child cannot waive away that child's rights. You can't do that. So now that child comes of age, and they're under 6 now. Let's say they're 6 exactly. Lead paint poisoning. They've got 12 years till they're 18. After they're 18, they could bring a cause of action against that owner of the property. And I would hesitate to say against even the previous owner of the property if my client buys it. So what my client is going to have to do in that instance, because he has knowledge that there's lead paint, if he buys it, he's going to have to relocate that family for a period of time to go in and de-lead the property. But the best bet would be you don't want to evict them per se, because you don't want it to say it's retaliatory, which it is de facto retaliatory. I would find a nice hotel for them to go to now and be removing the lead paint. The seller, meanwhile, has absolutely no intentions of doing anything whatsoever in the short term. I think they're a family that's owned it for quite a period of time, and I'm going to say they've never had any issues. Just because you've never had any issues doesn't mean there's not an issue. It's just something that hasn't been dealt with. So we have to be very, very careful whether we're representing sellers or representing buyers. We want our sellers to tell us the truth. Not always easy. For those of you, not to mix apples and oranges, but if you've ever done a short sale, sellers can conveniently forget a lot of things, like that, that old judgment against them that's on record at the Registry of Deeds. And I've had that happen way too many times. You need, obviously, communication. And lead paint is the last thing in many people's minds, but it's something that they have to think about and be upfront and honest with you. A lead paint inspector. So if I find out there's potentially lead paint, or I think there might be lead paint, and I have an inspector come in and test it, he or she will issue a letter of interim control, meaning we know there's lead paint. We're going to do our best to control it. And by that, it might very well mean removing that family with a child under the age of 6. Because when you start, if you're going to remove it, which my opinion would be the best way to do it, because then it's, to the extent you can remove it, it's now gone, as opposed to encapsulation. It's still going to take a period of time to do that. But while it's being done, that family has to find another place to live. All of their belongings are going to have to be removed, because that dust is going to be in the air. It's going to be on everything. It's probably there already. You just don't, you don't realize it. But ultimately, it's going to be an inconvenience, but it's going to be an expense. So if someone's looking to buy a property and they're thinking that one of the first things they might want to have to add, or they should add to their budget, is have a lead paint test, and the possibility, if it's a 1920s home, have a possibility they're going to have to de-lead the entire structure, or at least encapsulate it up to 5 feet, whatever 5 feet is. Let's see. And then who's responsible for that? The owner's responsible for it. So if I've now purchased this property, as the owner of the property, I'm responsible for it. It can always be thrust back in the seller's the seller's court. We want you to do it. It's just like evicting someone. Many sellers just don't want to deal with it. I do a lot of landlord-tenant law. Unfortunately, I've got extra, I for good, bad, or indifferent, and if any of you are landlords, I empathize with you. But I was, to a certain extent, kind of grateful that this past year we had that moratorium. I know my landlords were not. Be that as it may, it gave me a break to do all the closings we had, and I was blessed with that. But being a landlord-tenant attorney and representing primarily landlords, it's not an easy road to hoe. I mean, you're out there, the courts are stacked against us, the statute's stacked against us. And if I'm evicting someone, even without COVID, it's still not pleasurable in any which way, shape, or form. And it's always smarter quite often, or I should say, the best way, might not be the cheapest way, but the best way, in my humble opinion, is often cash for keys. Sometimes that becomes cash for keys as part of a court action. I'd rather give someone notice today that I want you out the end of March than wait and wait till sometime in February and give them that same notice. And as a tenant, I'd want to get as much notice as possible. Essentially, dealing with lead paint, you're not necessarily quitting a tenancy. There's going to have to be some cooperation. The average person doesn't like any disruption in their life whatsoever, but this is going to be for their benefit. They're probably going to be looking for, if you're relocating a family because of lead paint, they're probably going to be looking for some kind of compensation to do so. So if I'm a buyer or a buyer's attorney or a buyer's agent, I want the landlord, the seller, to do everything. On the other side, if I'm the seller, I'm done. I don't want to be bothered. I don't want anyone. I don't want to have to deal with this anymore. And somewhere in between are all of us having to deal with this.
I mean, once they get the disclosure form, the buyer, they can move into the home, and then they have a certain amount of time they.
Right. If it's your own family and I have someone under the age of 6 there, I'm taking on that, if you will, responsibility. If it's my family, if I'm the owner of the property and I have someone else's family living there with a child under the age of 6, I can't discriminate against them. It's a vicious catch-22. I can't say you can't live there, but on the other side of the coin, I don't want you to live there. I want to remediate first. So before I start renting out units, if I have a unit that's already occupied, but is the one I've discussed down in Fall River, it's almost too late. That's why I desperately don't want my client to buy this property, but he desperately wants to purchase this property, and they're willing to roll the dice. I think it's a huge gamble, because that, again, we're talking, if that child's under 6, that child has plenty of time to sue later on in the future. And how do I prove where the lead paint came from? The other part of the equation is that child goes for any type of blood testing at any point in his or her life, and a doctor comes up and, hey, there's lead in your blood. The doctor now has a responsibility to report that to the health department. So that's another can of worms that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So going back to the program that the state created, once that licensed inspector has come in and has issued a letter of interim control, he or she has a duty now to bring that property under compliance within a year of it issuing it. So I've gone into a unit, I'm a lead paint inspector, a lead paint remover, a licensed remover. I've determined, here's the property, there is lead paint. I have a year now, or I should say the owner of the property has a year to remediate, to get rid of it. On the flip side, again, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, I can't discriminate. So if somebody wants to move in, probably the best I'm going to do is say, you know what, the property is being renovated. If the family is already in the property, that's a big issue. I have to deal with that. So I can't evict them. The first thing they're going to say is, I was discriminated against. This is a retaliatory eviction. There are attorneys I know, one in particular, she's a sweetheart, but she loves cases like this. She loves to find someone that, and most of the time, the owner of the property, or either the one selling or the one, they're totally, I'm going to use the phrase innocent. They didn't do anything on purpose to cause injury to anyone. It's like hazardous waste. You find yourself, or speeding on the highway. Just because it says 55 and you're going 65, the police officer, the state trooper has a right to stop you. You were speeding. You committed an offense. Did you intend to do so? No. You were chit-chatting with the passenger in your car? No. You're going to get a ticket. I'm going to say through no fault of yours other than your lead foot, and I'm one of those people with a lead foot. I've committed an offense. I'm going to get fined. Obviously, lead paint is a much bigger thing. I've done nothing wrong. I buy a piece of property. It's a totally different class. But if I buy a piece of property, and I was talking about a commercial transaction, a client of mine is buying a piece of large area of property off Route 1 and on the North Shore, and it has hazardous waste on it, I own that. If I've now taken possession of the property and they find hazardous waste later on, I'm now a principal responsible party. I didn't put it there. In fact, the seller might not have put it there. It might have been one of these, you don't hear about it too often, but it might have been somebody, if you will, with a bunch of barrels and unloaded some barrels. Usually you see this in states north of Massachusetts, in New Hampshire and Maine, and people just dump them off the side of the road, which I'm sure still happens, hazardous waste. But with Circular and RCRA, which are two acronyms, Superfund, Google Superfund sites, the owner of the property, through no fault of theirs, is responsible. Just like that, the owner of property with lead painted is responsible. Doesn't matter if you put it there or not. Doesn't matter if you had knowledge of it or not. You're responsible to remove it. The one good thing is if you decide you're going to buy a property that's a 1920s property, but it's a vacation property, you're very well relieved from having to take care of the lead paint. I would strongly advise doing it anyway. It's probably a better practice to do so. But if you're renting out the property, property rentals that are under 31 days are not part of the statute. But I would imagine, I would suggest it's a best practice actually to remove the lead paint. The law defines a rental as something not to exceed 100 days. Very, very seldom, you're not going to see tenancies at will or leaseholds that are typically under a year. There might be those out there for 6 months. A tenancy will obviously is month to month regardless. But most people, if I'm moving my family in lock, stock, and barrel, I plan on staying there for a while. Unless I know I'm going to Salisbury Beach or some other place for a short period of time, I'm renting it for a week or two, I'm not going to be covered. So I would like to think for people I can think of off the top of my head that own rental property like that literally earn a living, or at least help pay their mortgage by doing so, wherever the property might be, that they've done their due diligence and they've removed the lead paint to the extent that there is some, even if they don't have to. Rooming houses are not considered unless they're long-term. They're not covered by it. You don't usually have 6-year-olds living in rooming houses, I hope. I don't want to think about that, but I would imagine it could happen. It's basically homes that were built prior to 1978. So quite often I'm at a closing, I pull up that form that I showed everyone that you can't read from where you are. I don't think you guys, unless you're Superman or Superwoman, you can't read that far away. I know I can't. I need my glasses. But essentially, if the home is built after 1978, we still have to fill out the form for FHA every single time for every closing. And I want to say VA too, but it's of no effect, right? There's no lead paint. Why? Because it was built after 78. I used to jokingly say, and not a lead paint joke, but just a joke in general. I would jokingly say, unless you went to your grandpa's basement and pulled out old cans of paint and started painting the house, there really wouldn't be lead paint in that house. If it was built after 1978. I hope that's true. I presume that's true. I can't imagine anybody. I mean, that's one of the banes of our existence when one of your seller clients says, "Oh, I got rid of everything, but I left those cans of paint there in case they wanted to touch stuff up." I don't know if any of you have ever had that, but I've run into it on more than one occasion. And the first words out of my mouth to my seller client is, that buyer really doesn't want your old paint. In fact, not only do they not want your old paint, and we're not talking even lead paint, just paint in general, get rid of it. Do whatever, get some kitty litter, put it in, whatever it is they advise doing to get rid of paint legitimately, legally, get rid of it. But my favorite one was property up in Manchester, New Hampshire, where the client said, well, the paint was here when I moved in. Okay, guess what? Your buyer doesn't want it. They don't want that paint, just like we don't want lead paint in houses. So the lead law is both federal and state. In fact, almost every single statute across the country was based on Massachusetts law. So we were the first to do it. One of the few handouts that I had sent over to Sarah that she'll email is in regards to New Hampshire. There's relatively recent law in New Hampshire from 2019. I am not up on it, so I'm not going to even discuss it, other than to say it wouldn't be, if you are dealing with property in New Hampshire, there are many old homes in New Hampshire as well. So you just have to be on the lookout for it. They're not as lenient as it used to be, but it's definitely not as strict as Massachusetts. Yeah. It's still a scary thing to deal with. So Mass law satisfies what the federal law requires. All the old paint laws that protect children under the age of 6. And again, we're going with that 5-foot height recommendation, or I should say not recommendation, governed to either encapsulate it or remove it. The law is silent as to older children and adults, but quite frankly, as I mentioned several minutes ago, ancient Rome was affected by lead in the pipes that brought water into the city of Rome. Lead affects all of us. That's why we don't have lead gasoline anymore. And places like Flint, Michigan have issues, and in other older cities, because they use lead. You might have lead within an older home as well in the pipes. You might have I had for the longest time, my home's an older home, not really old, not 1920s old, but old enough. And yours truly would have to play plumber on occasion. And we had a lead trap. and it looked like an octopus. It was the strangest thing. And one time, I didn't realize my own strength. And I always forget which way the right to tight, left to loose. And I went, my Superman powers came out and I tore the thing apart. Not a fun thing to do, especially when your bathtub is full of gray water. And the good thing was my brother-in-law is a plumber. So he came to my house and he said, you can buy some nice goop stuff. If it ever happens, totally off subject. If it ever happens to you, first thing he said was, go buy some silicone, put it all around. And then the next thing he said to me was, I'll be back tomorrow. And the words out of my mouth were not nice. It's like, I'm that guy who was there for you. You got to be there for me. So he replaced everything, thank goodness, with the lovely stuff called PVC and all that. Get rid of the lead. But there's lead pipes in many old homes, or the connections to many old homes. So it's not just the paint, but the paint's the most obvious that people can actually test. They're not going to be digging up the streets to find out, or going into the walls to see if there is lead in the pipes.
In ours college, apparently our well is like a 700-foot well, and we did both the water flow test and the quality test, and it came back very slightly elevated in mud. You're not going to go down to 700 feet and figure it,
No.
So we had the sellers put in reverse osmosis, and every year we maintain it and we check the water at its time. But that was, you're like,
Well, there's all kinds of lovely things, and that's well water, right? We think of well water, and I can't remember, it's on Netflix, this program. There's a whole program on Netflix about a whole bunch of bad things. And one of them is water. And if you, I don't know, set into your remote Netflix water, it's maybe half an hour long at 40 minutes. It's an interesting, it talks, not just Flint, it talks about all over the way we take, and they really bashed the water bottling companies. It's interesting. We don't realize what a huge resource water is, but it's scary. I mean, if you have, at the very least, you should have a Brita water filter or something. I don't care where your water's coming from. You should have something there, because you just truly don't know.
well, and for us, it's, for the big come out every single year, that, I'm always like, it's new year, time for the water. It's maybe $200. So
It's the safety of it's the health and safety of your family. That's really what it comes down to. The statutes and CMR that Sarah will send over later on. Again, the statutes are much shorter than the CMR. The CMR Mass Code of Regulation will set out all the whys and the wherefores. Again, it's something like 30 pages long. I don't presume anyone's going to actually read it. You don't read it unless you absolutely have to. But ultimately, it sets out the encapsulation, 5 feet or under. It's silent as, I was just saying that, silent as to older children, adults, but it affects us all in large ways. The whole idea is a 6-year-old, the brain is still developing anyway. And that's our biggest issue, is what lead could do to a developing brain and other vital organs in the body. So the law requires it to be removed or encapsulated if you're under 6. Federal law explicitly states that the notification must be given before the purchaser or lessee is obligated to sign a contract. So one of the very first things you'll shove in front of somebody will be that lead paint notice. And quite often your seller, I have no knowledge. This was my grandparents' house. I really don't know. It's in there. I'd rather have my seller say, I have no knowledge. As opposed to, I have knowledge, because now everybody's on pins and needles. It's in. I want to say we all know it's in there, but I don't want to obligate my client for more than I have to if I'm the seller's attorney. And the buyer's attorney, it's going to behoove them at some point, either before or after they purchase, if it's an older home, to have it tested, especially if it's a single family home and your own family is going to be living there. I would want it to be taken care of. Not that it's something that's going to be remediated instantaneously. An owner must have a letter of compliance or a letter of interim if the dwelling was built before 78 and a child under 6 years of age lives there. I can't tell you how many people don't have that. In fact, people who've owned property for years and years, same people haven't had their smoke detectors checked in forever either. And it blows my mind. It doesn't have to be that old. The new law is that, right, they're good for 10 years, and that law has only been out, I want to say 2 or 3 years now. So time marches on, if you have someone who has a home they're selling that's been in the family for years and years and years, generation after generation, I guarantee you no one's done anything, or very, very, very little. They've done the absolute minimum. I'm not saying it's, it's rampant all over, but I'd rather err on the side of caution as the buyer. But the seller could be perfectly within their rights to say, I have no knowledge of it. So now I have a 6-year-old living in there. I have an obligation as the owner of the property to have it tested. And if that inspector comes in, who's I'm presuming and hoping is also a licensed remediator, he or she is going to provide me with that letter, that interim letter. And now I've got a year to clean it up and get rid of it. The one down in Fall River I keep talking about, I know they have nothing. They have, I'm 99.9% sure they have nothing, and also no desire to change the situation either. Vacation rentals, again, are not subject to it. Lead paint laws are only applicable, I don't want to say it goes without saying, but they're only applicable to residential property. It's not that, I want to say typically your 6-year-old's not going to be walking around an old mill building, but anything is possible. I had worked, for those of you familiar with Malden Mills on the Lawrence Methuen line, which had the major fire well over 10 years ago now. Most of those buildings, I guarantee you, had lead paint in them. And most of them went up in smoke. There are some, now they're building housing out of many of them right now. The bones of the building, the columns, I would see walking around those buildings, paint chips. Fairly certain at least some of it included lead paint, but the law doesn't necessarily concern itself because it's not residential. Though some of those buildings are now being converted into residential. So think of the old law, many of the ones so-called marketed as lofts in, say, downtown Lowell and elsewhere. Keep in mind that they could very well have lead paint in them, even though they were never built to be residential dwellings. They are essentially they could be residential dwellings now. Again, only licensed people can remove the lead paint. Same is true with asbestos, by the way. I can't tell you how often people will just do whatever they wanted to do. So I don't know what the statute of limitations is offhand on asbestos removal, but as a kid, whose father kept him employed, he was an electrician. And one summer, my job was to re-side our 3-family house. So I'm out there. What I did not know, and he never told us and never thought twice about it, the shingles we removed from that house were asbestos shingles. We took the whole summer to remove all the shingles. And what we did, because back in the day, you could do that because I'm wicked old. Back in the day, we would shovel everything into a makeshift dump truck in the back of a van and bring it to the transfer station, which is, if you know Greater Lawrence at all, is located on top of Prospect Hill in Lawrence, and just dump the stuff. And I don't know how many truckloads we dumped there. Would not happen today, right? You would actually have to have a licensed asbestos remediator remove all of that stuff. And ultimately, again, just like any other hazardous waste, the owner is responsible. And that happens to make sure it's done properly. Let's see, again, lenders cannot, not again. So lenders also can't discriminate or be liable. So every closing that I have, especially Massachusetts, I don't always see this form in New Hampshire, but in every Massachusetts closing, there will be a form where the bank has, you're not going to sue us if there's this. You're not going to sue, like one particular lender has one for lead paint, radon. They all have them for smoke detectors. And basically, you're not going to sue the bank because the bank allowed you to buy a property with lead paint in it. The banks never lose. So they can't discriminate, but they're also not going to be held liable for the lead paint that's in a property. Lead paint discrimination or discrimination based on that can violate the fair housing law. Obviously, you're supposed to give notice if there's lead paint, but you're supposed to deal with it. And you can't decide, again, I'm not going to rent to you because you're a young couple and you might have children. But as I said a few minutes ago, you could rent to an older couple who takes in their grandchild because we live in that kind of world. It happens all the time. There is an incentive for each dwelling unit. There's a tax incentive for $1,500, which probably over time will increase because we like to, and we like people to be proactive and do that. But the state of Massachusetts has a $15 tax credit to de-lead. It might cost an awful lot more. I have no idea what it costs to de-lead a unit, but I would say since you have to do it anyway, at the very least take, what's that? Could it be 10,000? Yeah. I mean, so the credit might not be a huge amount, but it's something. And you could feel at least you're getting something for doing the right thing, doing what you have to do. It includes all residential properties built prior to 78. A lot of repetition here. I apologize. Let's see. Owners typically would get a special permit to be able to de-lead the property. And the licensees, so those removing it, they're responsible for compliance. But again, it's all going to fall back on, I guarantee you it will not fly if you tell a housing court judge, I didn't know. It will not fly if you tell a housing court judge, I thought he was licensed. Or you tell the health department or the inspectional services department, I thought he was licensed. That's not going to fly. If you're an owner of the property and you're de-letting, you want to see the license, just like if you're notarizing a document, any of you are notaries, you want to see someone's driver's license or other form of photo ID. You want to cover yourself. So as the owner of the property, you want to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
How long are those certificates good for? Like if they do de-lead and they get their de-leaded certificate?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I would say if they've encapsulated, they're not forever, right? Common sense would tell me that, because over time, just brush it, not that the walls are going to get a lot of wear and tear, but theoretically they could. I would imagine if it's actually been removed from the property, the certificates would be for the lifetime, right? Would last a lot longer. And I don't know if they vary. I know when they're issued, they should be treated like gold. So when I have a client who's buying a multiple family property, an older property, I'll put in the purchase and sales agreement specifically to include all de-lead certificates, to the extent they exist. And often the seller will say, we don't have any, right? Because quite frankly, no one wants to really know the answer to that question. But that's a good, I need to find that answer. But I'm not sure how long they might last. There's another form for those of you who have the pleasure of assisting people with renting their properties. One of the many documents Sarah's going to send out later is a tenant-led law notification, which does a lot of the same exact things that the purchase and sales one will, and it explains about the lead paint law, and more importantly, it lets that tenant, again, the tenant needs to make the decision, do I want to rent this property? Let's face it, most tenants don't have the privilege of picking and choosing, especially in the market right now. If you know anyone who's a landlord, and I know plenty of people who are landlords, some wish they weren't. Right now, it's a landlord's market in terms of the properties that are out there. There are many people who are find themselves having to find a new place to live because the landlord, their existing landlord wants to go up on the rent or what have you, which might not even be a market value rent. So tenants can't necessarily be picky and choosy about where they want to go. I would strongly suggest if you're the landlord, you're the owner of the property, renting out the property, it's always going to be held against you. I don't care who you are, especially the more knowledge you have. So if any of you happen to be landlords as realtors, or me as an attorney, if I'm a landlord, we're going to be held to a higher standard. They're always going to hold, that housing court judge is going to hold us to a much higher standard. If I'm a property manager and I manage 20, 30, 100 or more properties, I'm going to be held to a higher standard, as opposed to Mr. and Mrs. Smith who buy a two-family, they've just bought, and they either the other unit already has a tenant or they rent it out to someone. I'm not going to say they're not going to be as culpable. We're all going to be as culpable, but I would imagine that judge is not going to look at them with as much disdain as someone who should know better, for lack of a better phrase. We're professionals. We're all licensed professionals. We have knowledge, and that's the biggest issue. I deal with many. I don't take on a lot of tenant clients, but when I do, it's really typically really bad. Someone has not, might be the security deposit law. It might be a whole bunch of little things. I had one, I want to say just before COVID, where the landlord lived on the property. It was a legal 3-unit building. My clients were living in the 4th unit, which truly did not exist. And to cut to the chase, eventually the municipality said, no, this is not a unit, you have to vacate. And it was not pleasurable whatsoever for any of us. My clients for having to leave, the landlord for being in Dutch, for renting out a unit they shouldn't have. I don't know if there was lead paint in it, but odds are there probably was. Never got that far. And there was a child under the age of actually 2 living there. But there are situations, landlords that are living on a property are not necessarily totally are going to be blameless, but they're less culpable. In my opinion, I'm also not a housing court judge. And I'm also not a judge that's going to be sitting in on a civil action for someone who's been damaged by lead paint poisoning. So it's just important to fill out the same form, making sure the tenant is understanding I'm renting this property and I don't know. But if I'm the owner of that property renting it out, I should know. I should have had it tested, and before I rent it out, remediate it. And I'm keep thinking over and over the gentleman down that's purchasing in Fall River who, if you have people like that, I would highly advise. We all want to. I don't get paid if it doesn't close, just like you guys. But I really don't want him buying someone else's major problem. So I think I've covered pretty much all of it. There are tax credits. There are funding options. And the biggest thing, one of the biggest statutes that a tenant or even a buyer could fall under. So if I'm a buyer and the seller now, especially if it's somebody who, and we have many of these people out today, who are buyer fixer flippers, as I call them, there's probably a better name for them. The investors who got a great deal and now they're going to, put some blood, sweat, and tears and other equity in the property and make it better than it was before and now sell it to someone else. They're just as responsible as well. They're in the business of doing it. So anyone who's in the business of doing something, if I'm just selling my home, I'm not in and it's a single family home or even a multiple family home, and I'm selling it to someone, and I filled out the form and I checked off, I'm without knowledge, I'm going to be hard pressed unless you could prove otherwise. If you could find someone in the world to say, no, Paul had a lead paint inspector come in and told him there's lead paint throughout this whole house, odds are you won't find that because I personally haven't, but just thinking in general, if you could do that, then you might have some type of case. But if you don't have that, then the next thing is, well, Paul's in the business of buying, fixing, and flipping. He's in business. I'm a consumer. That purchaser now has bought the property. It's a stretch, but in Massachusetts, people in business can be sued by consumers under 93A, unfair and deceptive trade practices, right? That's probably, that lovely statute affects all of you. It affects me. People all, I can't tell you how often someone will tell me, in fact, someone was telling me about an issue dealing with their New Hampshire property yesterday. And one of my responses back to this individual was, unfortunately, New Hampshire's version of 93A is like this, really small, and Massachusetts is a lot more, right, a lot stronger. You're going to be held to a much higher standard. And landlords get slapped with 93A issues all the time. In fact, this boilerplate, if any of you are landlords and you've ever tried to evict someone, one of the many things that a tenant will do in filing their response, their answer, they'll file counterclaims, whether or not they're legitimate or not. They will check off, I used to call them mimeograph sheets, right? There's boilerplate that the Commonwealth gives, the housing specialists and the housing courts will give to tenants, and you're just checking off boxes. And I've seen people check off stuff that doesn't apply, but for the most part, they're checking boxes helter skelter, and 93A will be one of them. They'll check off. And just for the heck of it, maybe I'll put lead paint. Might not really be applicable, but I'll put that anyway. There's actually, I want to say there is boilerplate that says lead paint. So they check that off. Is there really lead paint? I had one a number of years ago that I'm grateful that my client actually decided not to use me to go forward. And I'm grateful because this property had no heat from March of that year all the way through New Year's. No heat in the property from winter to winter. Had at some points no hot water as well, by the way. And then they found out there was lead paint in the property, which was the trifecta. And I knew the other attorney. And in fact, I refer people to that other attorney all the time now. I mentioned her a second ago. She's a sweetheart. She loves those cases. And those people, unfortunately, that owner will, knowingly or not, is responsible for all of those issues. And they inherited the tenants. The tenants were the daughter and the daughter's family of the original tenant who was in there. The original tenant who moved out, left the daughter behind with 2 or 3 children. And there was lead, they found lead in the house. And so now the first words, get them into a hotel, get the heat back on, get the property de-leaded, jump through all the hoops. Frankly, my client didn't want to listen to reason. And so I honestly don't know what ended up happening with that. I probably should, later on today, I probably should go on masscourts.org to see if anything was ever filed. The reality is, when you're the owner of the property, whether you do it intentionally or not, especially with lead paint, it doesn't matter. It's your problem. So I have no idea, Sarah, I've been talking nonstop. Anyone have any questions, either virtually or?
What would be really good is just, so for me, and you know me, I'm all sorts of fun. So when I look at the lead paint form, whether it's Mass or New Hampshire, my biggest thing is that, and I don't mean this to be snarky, but I don't think that agents like to read, right? And we have to be able to describe this and explain it to our clients. So for instance, simple things like the seller cannot initial the boxes. They have to check it. It says check, right? They can't say they have and don't have documents, right? They have and don't have knowledge. And if they have and don't have.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Can everyone hear, everyone listening remotely, can you hear Sarah? I'm not saying, I think you're on mute.
Well, I have to, otherwise it'll.
All the feedback. Can I mute me?
No, it's okay. I can walk over you. I have my mask on, as long as you're okay with that.
I'm going to mute me for a second.
Well, no, now they can't hear us.
Okay, go ahead and you can.
Okay, so your seller client can't have and not have knowledge, and they can't have and not have documents. So they can't check all 4 boxes. They have to do A1 or A2 and B1 or B2. And it's really hard for them to say, I have no knowledge, but I have documents. That means you have knowledge. Now, I've had clients who, literally tears. Now, this was a friend from college's wife, and I took her out to lunch because she was so upset. This is up in Manchester, New Hampshire. And she's like, it's a 1940s house. I can't sign saying I have no knowledge. And I go, okay, but so what tests have you done, and where is the lead inspector said this is lead paint? She goes, well, I don't know. I've never done that. I go, okay, so you're going to assume that it's lead paint, which is logical because it was built in 1940. But you don't know. You don't have direct knowledge. You can't say, here yes, here no, here maybe, right? So I said, your options are this. You have no knowledge because, and I'm not hiding something. I'm not making it up, but you don't have that document. Or you're going to hire a lead paint inspector to come in, and then you're going to have to fix if anything comes up. She chose that she has no knowledge. Okay. But that was a really hard thing for her because ethically she thought, well, it's 1940. And I go, right. And every realtor and every attorney is going to say, well, gosh, there probably is. Right. But you can't say that you know. How do you know? Well, if you said, you have to have one of these 4 documents. Right. Same thing with the buyer side. They can't initial everything. By the way, they initial, not check. That's a potential fine. Just putting it out there. They can't say, I've received all documents. I've received no documents. That's C and D. Really? I touched Paul and I didn't touch Paul. How do I do both? Right? I can't. So you really have to look at it. And then E, if they don't initial E, you haven't done your job and you should be sued. E is that you've given them the 10 pages before the signature page. So even if the listing agent has put on MLS,
That's all on DocuSign, right?
here they put on MLS the signature page that the seller has completed. You are obviously going to have them address that form, but you still have to send them the 10 pages before that. That's the notification, hey, lead paint's an issue, right? And then F is my favorite. You're going to initial that you're going to check a box. You have to initial and then check a box. And all you're initialing is that you will check a box, that you want or don't want a lead paint test. So yeah, you might get sued anyway, but the cover your butt thing is actually read, which I know sounds snarky, but I'm like, no, really, just, it's there. And then common sense. I can't know Paul and not know him.
I would add, especially for those, I'm going to say me, I'm not a realtor. I could go out as an attorney and get my broker's license. I've actually thought about doing it so I can do other things. That said, I would never want to do your job. That said, all joking aside, I'd be a new realtor. First thing I'm going to do is go to someone else in my office and say, no, I'm not trying to be funny. Did I do everything I was supposed to do?
Yeah.
Because the repercussions for yourself are huge, and the repercussions for the brokerage are huge. I'd rather err on the side. I've been practicing now over 30 years, which I still can't believe, but it's over 30 years. When I first started practicing, one of the biggest issues I had as a young attorney, I didn't want to look stupid.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't ask questions, because if I ask questions, that means I don't know.
Right.
So just now someone had asked me a question. I don't know, I'm not going to lie. I don't know. I just don't. And I'm not going to make it up.
Yeah.
I've been so as a lawyer not in Mass, this is weird. So you guys have to take continuing ed in Mass and New Hampshire. As a lawyer in Massachusetts, I don't have to take continuing ed. I've been practicing 30 years. I have taken continuing ed, but I don't have to. New Hampshire and Rhode Island, I have to do, I think, 12 credits in New Hampshire a year, 10 credits in Rhode Island. The good thing is I can piggyback. My point is, I've attended continuing ed where the person speaking, honestly, with all due respect, doesn't have a clue. That's why I never want to teach those classes, because I don't want to be that person that doesn't have a clue. And I'm always reluctant. Your best response in every situation is ask someone else. Don't be afraid. Now, maybe after the 20th time, he or she that you're asking might say, hey, come on. But you know what? I'd rather have you ask me how to do it or what should be done. It's gonna make you a better realtor. It's gonna make you a better professional in general to not be afraid to ask the question. Don't be afraid to ask if you don't know, even if you've done it before. So I mentioned landlord.
Things come up.
Things come up.
I had a
COVID.
realtor. Yeah, I had a
COVID.
realtor who she's now in both Mass and New Hampshire, but when she first started, she was so worried, oh my gosh, potential $11,000 fine for every single part that could be wrong. So when she did, the selling agent, the listing agent would not send her the lead paint form with the signature page that was filled out by the seller. So she just starts filling it out. And I go, oh, so do you own the property? She goes, no. I go, okay. Are you representing the property? No. Okay. So no. And as the listing agent, you do not fill that out. But I'm like, so no, you can't fill it out. The buyer's agent for the seller. No. Right. Then finally the listing agent sends it. A1, A2, B1, B2 are all initialed, not checked. Okay. And I'm like, nope, you're not having your buyer sign that. No, because that again, if we ever get audited, it's not like the state is looking at every single lead paint form, but the attorneys are, and the banks are. And what if we get audited? Okay, that's where these fines are going to come in. So I said, no. She goes, well, he won't answer the phone. So someone may or may not have said, well, do you care if I call them? Who am I? I mean, honest, I'm not the team leader. I'm not an attorney. And I'm like, hey, it's Sarah Harder from Keller Williams. I just wanted to make sure that da-da-da-da. And within an hour, because I'm an unknown, right, we had the form. But I'm like, really, you cannot, as the buyer side, fill out the seller side. Like, these are just easy, cover your butt ways, and just read it if you get it. It's not a hard form, but it's really poorly put together.
I will defer to you guys every day of the week. When I get that in the package, and I have to make sure it goes back with the closing package, I will say, okay, you guys already, and almost all the time, one of you will volunteer, oh, I have it right here in my emails.
Right.
And I'll be, thank you. Can you email it to me? I'm gonna cheat, I'm gonna print it out, and we're just gonna follow along with what everyone already did and already said. It makes our lives so much, because what will happen is, whether it's the brokerage that gets audited directly, I don't think it would be my office getting audited. I typically will get audited by one of the title insurance companies, maybe once every so many years. But I guarantee you, the lenders get audited all the time by the banking industry. And they'll come in and they'll say, oh, you're missing, a little initial, right? You're missing a check mark here. It doesn't take a lot. And all of a sudden you get the frantic emails and phone calls. We need this done over again. We need the Form 1003, which is a mortgage loan application. They didn't sign this. And it's funny, every bank will have a form that says the quality control, we randomly pull so many files. No, they pull every single file. Look, I know they do. I just got a slew of emails from one of my lenders this morning, hoping kind of, because it makes it look like there might be potential refis or something. I have a feeling everyone is looking for some kind of document, maybe the title insurance policy. I have no idea. I forwarded them all to my paralegal for her to give me an answer. I'm hoping that by the time I leave here, she's gotten back to me saying, yeah, I've already dealt with them, or no, those are our all new refis. I'm hoping to find out their refis, but I have a feeling they're from purchases we did this past year. Whatever it might be, don't let anybody bully you either. I was going to say, there are those out there,
Yes.
and if you're a bully, I'm sorry for you. I don't think, I'm presuming there are no bullies either listening or in the classroom. If you know more than your fellow realtor, assist them, right? Don't, if they're doing something you think is not kosher, that's not right, maybe guide them along, give them, help them out. We're all in this together. I know, yeah, many of us are in competition. There are a gazillion people that do closings, right? There are plenty of lawyers out there. There are plenty of realtors out there. But help each other be the best realtor you can be. It can't, all it's going to do is build your reputation out in the world as a realtor. It's going to make you, that's somebody that is a team player. They might be with a totally different brokerage. I might have never had a transaction with him or her before, but they were willing to help me out there. Because I guarantee you, one of the worst things I never start with, and I don't like to say is, and I've said it a couple times, I'm a lawyer and I've been doing this so long. You know how I'm the first one to say, I'm not a specialist, right? I will use the phrase, I concentrate in real estate. I don't specialize in it. Now, I know a little bit. I know enough when I don't know something to say I don't know it. The laws are always changing. Landlord-tenant law has changed tremendously due to COVID. There are new things. I had to take a special trip into Boston this week to the Eastern Housing Court because the summary process forms have changed. Can't use the old ones I had. I had to go swap them out. Things are always, always, always changing. I don't care how long you've been doing what you've been doing, even whether it's as a realtor or anything else, there's always something we don't know. And knowledge is power, but sharing some of that knowledge is not a bad thing. It'll give you more respect. And when you don't know something, even if it's even if you're afraid to go to some person, go to somebody else. Somebody's willing. And my info, I'll make sure Sarah has it and shares it with you. If anybody has any questions, even if I don't have the answer, it will help to get the answer.
Do I have your info?
Just a little bit. I think it was New Year's Eve, or I can't remember. It was either Christmas Day or Christmas Eve or something. Do you want to do some classes in January?
Because I was home. I didn't think you'd answer.
Oh, of course, I answered like it was.
You were out of the
I don't know
office.
what I was doing on my computer, but not enjoying my family. I tried to do games with the family. Nobody wanted to do anything.
You didn't have to do a Zoom white elephant? That's what we
No,
had to do.
we were out shopping or something that day.
Well, here's what I can say. Paul, you've always been, so he's very calm. I don't know if you can tell.
Yeah.
Right? Really, really good with both buyers and sellers. Okay. My clients have loved working with you. So you've gotten really great feedback, or I've gotten really great feedback on Paul. And I can say as the realtor, wonderful to work with. And if I have a question, I know he's busy. I really didn't expect you would, I didn't even think you would get the email until you got back, so now I feel guilty. But here's the
I
thing,
always have my laptop and phone, so.
if I don't know something, if I'm not sure, if it's something that I don't really deal with all that much, I know that if Paul is someone I can say, hey, just out of curiosity, da-da-da-da. Or if I want, what is the best verbiage for me to use in paragraph 9, so I don't get sued? Essentially, I don't say that to him, but that's essentially my thing. This is the situation. What is your recommendation? Why do you think Paul wants to answer us?
He needs something is on the way.
Well, so besides his own track record,
He cannot do help out, and Paul is very patient guy too, you know, you're very patient, you come.
I tried. The sad thing is when I started losing it this week with the transaction because I had the seller and something was, I don't want to take anything for granted. And I hate to say it, I do have high blood pressure for a reason. That's why they have medication. But anyway, I could feel it. And the thing is, we have those days. We all have those moments. We have the other attorneys we're working with, the other professionals we're working with. I don't know about anyone here, but if you're trying to get a smoke detector inspection done or a final water reading done, a lot of times now it's lawyers that have to take care of those, especially in Methuen and Lawrence and Haverhill and so forth. But a lot of times, there's a new one now for anybody who's doing any properties and dealing with properties in the city of Lawrence. And I learned this by accident. I had a client buying. There was no mortgage on the property, so there's no escrow. And the taxes hadn't been paid for November. The November 1st taxes hadn't been paid. The city refused to do the smoke detector inspection until the taxes were paid.
Yeah.
And the mayor just swapped spaces. He just got a job working for Charlie Baker. And I actually like the mayor of Lawrence. Be that as it may, that was not cool because what's going to happen at closing? I'm going to make sure the taxes are paid. That's part of my job.
Right.
But don't even give me an opportunity. So there are always going to be little glitches in the matrix, whatever it might be. If you might have all the answers. And if you do, fantastic, because I know I don't. But there are those out there, talk to people who can get you answers. And don't be afraid to. And if you are afraid to talk to anybody else, I'll be more than happy to try to find the answer. If I don't know it, we'll figure it out.
he'll probably call me if it's something that he knows that I like.
Yes.
I just had a question on a multi-family that's been sold and they had those deletted certificates and all that. If the new owners want to rent one of the apartments, do they have to get their own deletted or they use the prior?
I believe the DLED certs are, and that was a question that came out, how long they're good for. I want to say they're good forever, but that doesn't, half of me says that can't be true. The short answer is I would actually, in that particular city or town, I would check with the health department. We have DLED certificates from the city of such and such that were issued in, 2004. Can I still go by these?
Okay.
And the health department might very well say yay or nay. It's like everything else, everything changes. So one thing I do know, and I'll totally, again, off subject, but I was thinking of this when Sarah was mentioning about getting well water tested once a year and things that come up. Radon remediation. It comes up quite often that people want to have a radon test done. And that's great and that's lovely. Did you know, and this is, and I'm presuming no one here knows, maybe you do. Has anyone here ever, and you can nod online if you're listening, has anyone ever bought or helped somebody buy or sell a property in the town of Groton, Mass?
Yes.
Okay. Groton actually has an ordinance
Yep.
that requires a radon test be done,
Yeah.
which blew my mind. I've never seen that before. And I had clients both buying and selling in Groton, and they didn't
I
like
didn't
it.
know it was mandatory.
Yeah, in that town it is. It's
Yeah.
that town's own ordinance.
Yeah.
And it's one of those little things you only learn if you have dealt with it before. And sometimes it's an anomaly. It's like when a town has a municipal light company. I might be doing a closing for a property and having no idea that the town of Reading or North Reading or Wilmington is serviced by Reading Municipal Light. or Peabody by Peabody Municipal Light, or that if I am getting a final water reading done in the town or the city of Lynn, that they have their own water commission certificate, just like an MLC. All these little things, and the only reason why I'm mentioning them is there is someone else that you either know or are connected to that might have dealt with this before, right? So I never would have known the town of Groton required these. We were doing the radon, my client wanted to do a radon test anyway. But the property he was selling had a radon remediation system in it at some point. He disconnected it because it made too much noise. He had to have one reinstalled.
Because I guess they found radon in Groton.
Yep.
Well,
I'm
radon's everywhere. The glaciers
Have a
didn't
basement, it's in the
discriminate.
basement.
They're everywhere. Hey, in New Hampshire, you're gonna test the water for radon in the water.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a more expensive remediation, my understanding, but it happens.
Well, guys, I want to respect your time and Paul's time, so we did run a little bit over, but I just wanted to make sure anyone on Zoom have any questions if you want to ask Paul while he's here. Go ahead, Frank.
I got two questions. One is, I've got a house that was built before 1978. I plan on having my windows replaced this summer. And I've been told that if I do that, I should make sure the contractor is, and I forget the acronym, I think it's RPR certified. I may have that acronym wrong. If I do that requirement, have I implied or inferred, did someone infer that I have knowledge of the likelihood of lead in the house, or am I just being overcautious?
There's nothing wrong with being overcautious. I don't think that's, I think it's better to be overcautious than cavalier. I would suggest you have still, just like Sarah said, for something, you have no knowledge, you have no actual knowledge unless you've tested it.
So I could hire the RPR contractor and still say I have no knowledge that there's lead in the house.
I would think so.
Okay.
I would think very much.
And then
you
the second question is very quick. Everything you've talked about seems to center around landlords and tenants. And you made the statement that if the landlord knows there's lead in the house, in the units, the landlord has to do the remediation before. Okay. I've also heard that for a single family home, if the seller knows there's lead in the house or discovers lead in the house, it's the buyer's responsibility to remediate on a single family resident. Is that true?
I think it comes down to if the seller is willing to do it, the seller could do it. If the buyer wants to do it, the buyer can do it. But once the buyer is now the owner, the onus is on them to remediate. I would think you should remediate. I have an obligation if I'm renting this property out to someone to remediate it.
Okay.
That goes without saying. But if it's now going to be where my family lives, part of me says, why wouldn't I want to make sure it's removed if I know this?
Well,
it could be a bargaining thing with the seller.
As a seller, they find out that, they want a lead test, and there's a lead test done, and they say, yep, there's lead in the house. And then I can say, well, fine. I mean, I'll sell you. I could say to the buyer, I will sell you this house, but it's your responsibility to bring it into compliance. I'm not saying what I should do. I'm asking what I have to do under the law.
I think the seller has the right to say, I'm just like anything else, I'm not doing anything, take it or leave it, or I'll give you a closing cost. Our favorite thing to do is throw money at things. I'm going to give a closing cost credit for something.
You can negotiate. I mean, here's the thing. It's typically the buyer's responsibility to do the inspection, just like every other inspection. It can be negotiated, but that doesn't mean the seller has to agree to do it, just like the buyer doesn't have to agree to buy it.
Okay, but the landlord does have to make the, okay.
If you're going to be renting it out, I think you most certainly have to.
Okay. I just want to clarify. Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
I think you have to pay also for if they have to move into a hotel or they have to
Absolutely.
pay.
That's why it behooves you to get it done. If you're buying a property that you intend to, it's going to be, I'm going to say your business. You have to think of being a landlord as a business. If you're buying a property, jump through all the hoops that you're supposed to jump through, and those include making sure you de-lead the property if there is indeed lead in the property.
Lisa, did you get one?
Yes.
Any other questions at all from anyone?
All right.
Well, thank you guys so very much for listening to me go on about.
Thank you,
In all
Jamie.
sincerity,
Look at it.
thank you. If any of you have any questions that you might have been too shy to ask, feel free, you'll have my email later on. Sarah will forward it to everyone. Please feel free to give me a ring. I always have my phone on me. I learned yesterday my mailbox on my phone was full. I tried to delete some of those this morning, but I know as we've been talking here for the last hour or so, I'm sure it's filled up again. But
All right, guys. So
Thank
I'll be
you.
sending out, it takes a little bit for everything to process, so I'll be sending everything out, by the end of the day. Bye, guys.